This past weekend, as of recording this, I visited Cross Plains, Texas for Howard Days, Robert E. Howard Days, a celebration of Robert E. Howard's life. Most who know him will know him as creator of Conan the Barbarian and other characters like Solomon Kane or El Borak. He wrote many boxing stories, westerns, a great body of work, poetry as well. I must admit, I'm a little bit disappointed that I didn't go just on an off week. At any other point in the summer, I think I would have preferred having to call ahead and make sure the museum was open, but seeing the house in a more calm, quiet, kind of refined state might have been nice. But I did get a chance late at night on Friday to walk around Cross Plains after dark for 4 or 5 hours, just wandering and thinking. And I may post a few pictures from those walks as I talk here. Maybe my favorite, and this frankly makes the trip worth it, as silly and small as it is, of any of the things that I got while I was there in Cross Plains, Texas, is this little booklet of Howard's illustrations, which I'll post some images of as I discuss it. There's a lot of silly schoolboy illustrations in there, and little crude maps of riverbeds and things like that he's plotting out for the purpose of Western plots and those sorts of things. But one of the more valuable maps to me that I found in there was a map of the Hyborean age sort of world in which stories like Conan the Barbarian tales take place in. And it's been overlaid with a sort of rough map of modern Europe and North Africa and the upper Middle East, giving you an idea of where a fictional land like Zingara maps onto Europe. Samaria, for example, kind of bridges northern England and Scotland over into lower Norway and Sweden. So, and this, while things like this are available online, it's very cool seeing it in his own hand and laid out so clearly, with no kind of interim or pretense to cloud anything that's being communicated by this very simple map. I'm stricken when I think about Howard that, more so than any other writer I can think of, he bucks any of these sort of hyper midwit obsessions that cloud people's engagement with genres like fantasy today. This sort of myopic mouth breather obsession with, you used the word narcissist in a fantasy text. That's a reference to Greek mythology. Surely Greek mythology doesn't exist in your fantasy setting. Surely miles and pounds don't exist in your fantasy setting. This is ludicrous. Surely they would have their own renditions of these systems of measurement, their own mythology upon which to base these words. Wholly laying aside the fact that there's no way in a narrative to commune that amount of linguistic understanding on a reader who would be absolutely blind to any of it, picking up a tale. All of these things are done in translation to you might as well write the entirety of your fantasy tale in a fictional language of your own fabrication, which would be admirable in a sense, but would never be relevant to anybody but you, and really, functionally, unless you were fluent in the language you created, wouldn't even be relevant to you. Howard is entirely divorced from this sort of myopic obsession with the supposed breaks in immersion. He had a wonderful imagination and clearly did not expect that his readers were idiots. He gave them the credit of knowing that they had the imagination to kind of carry over extrapolations about his world. Even in his most obscure stories about his most obscure characters and obscure locations, Robert E. Howard breathes a real, visceral, almost tangible vitality into the places he's describing. And the action sequences Robert E. Howard writes are some of the most well-placed and intuitive that I've ever encountered. In fact, I would say they are, to me, the most intuitive and easy to grasp and impactful that I've encountered in fiction of any kind. Those of you who tuned in to the poem upload earlier before the trip will maybe recognize that in addition to that poem, if you're not familiar with Howard's work more broadly, themes of the clash of barbarism and civilization are very core to a lot of the things that he wrote, even in latter day, in terms of historical setting, publications like his Westerns. This element of Howard's work is at the core of what it means for something to be Howardian. Visiting Cross Plains this year was very impactful to me. Howard died by suicide at my age. I'm the same age now as he was when he died. And it's very frightening in a way, humbling certainly, that he created such a vast body of work in such a short life. It's very impressive what he managed to achieve, and I think it goes without saying that it really would have been incredible to see what he might have created had he lived even just another couple decades, not even to silver-haired, aged wisdom, but just to 45 or 50. It would have been incredible to see what he might have cooked up in that span of time. But anyway, with Howard's life and work, and now his home, so fresh in my mind, I figured I would maybe celebrate Howard's life this many years on, almost 90 years on, by reading a bit of my own fantasy work that shares this connection with civilization and barbarism, as a lot of my work, horror or fantasy, does. Certain names in the fantasy settings, such as the god Kramuk, the kind of father of the Ida, are, I think, clear syndups to Crom, the god of Conan and Samaria more broadly in the Hyborean age setting of Howard. And it's fair to say more widely that the setting wouldn't exist without Howard. He's a core element, especially as I entered adulthood, my teenage years in adulthood, as to why I ever, he along with Tolkien are really the reason why I have such an abiding love of fantasy and secondary world creation in general. So the book I'm going to be diving into today is going to be Kandar and Her Peoples. I have a lot of these battered, evocative-looking little notebooks I foolishly go out and buy, filled with sort of in-universe notes, as if some Sholoshaitian scribe is going out and visiting these lands and kind of taking brief anthropological notes as things occur to him during his travels. So this is the one on Kandar. If you want to dive further into themes and places involved in this story, then Starlit and Steel is a good place to start. You don't really need any backing in the setting or broader understanding to enjoy that tale. I think it works as a standalone story. I won't read the whole thing, but I'll give enough information to kind of give you an idea of what these books generally contain, what the process of kind of world building and brainstorming is like. Most of the rest of the book, after I am going to stop reading, is mostly just nomenclature, language notes, a breakdown of all the different clans and what their names mean, and their rituals, coming-of-age rituals, and things like this. But the portions I'm going to read are broadly to do with history and mythology connected to these people. Of Kandar and Her People. A note on the maps of Kandar. The tribes of Khandar are nomads whose respective territories are in a constant state of flux. Borders are both flexible and temporary, as wars between clans are common, and few clans can police the full breadth of their claimed territory. Moreover, such borders, based on local landmarks vague to non-natives, are impossible for outlanders to grasp in detail. Breaking of the bond. Harakwe and Kandarog were lovers in the age of legend, and after the fall of the Creator, they fought side by side against Kramak and his ilk over the corpse of the fallen god. When the wounded Harakwe retreated to his caverns to lick his wounds, she accompanied him. But as Harakwe forged his code of discipline, Kandarog balked at the restrictions to which she'd be subjected as a wife of the Lord of War. She longed for the days when Harakwe was free to wander and hunt by her side. Now he was entirely beholden to his quest for vengeance and the conquest of indulgence. Gone were the days when they hunted, rode, and slew together. For a time, she tried to honor Harakwe's new path, but the call of wanderings under starry night skies was too great to ignore, and in time, Kandarog told her love that she had to leave and seek her own path. Harakwe's ensuing wrath shattered the last of the love between them. Heartbroken and overcome with a wrath to match Harakwe's own, Kandarog fled to the open savanna, where the open skies she adored were most perfectly seen. She shaped her children, the Kandari, in her own image, and instilled them with the ferocity to survive the wilds into which they were born. Her daughters, like her, would never accept the yoke of men. This done, Kandarog rose skyward to guide her huntresses in darkness. So it was that the moon was made, and the Kandari thrived beneath it. The Lunar Way. When Kandarog gave the savannah to the Kandari, she instructed her daughters to use both their wild fury and their cold cunning to eke out their survival in the grassland. The Kandari philosophy reviles the civilized hyper-legalism and restraint of Harakwe. However, it also rejects the pure surrender to emotion and impulse preached by Kramak. The lunar path of Kandarog is found between the two. Life beyond life. Kandarog, like Harakwe, sends those of her daughters who do not die in glory back to the mortal coil through rebirth. Unlike the Lord of War, Kandarog will often punish those who led indolent or weak lives with a rebirth as a Niena or hyena, with each representing a lower tier of being. To escape the cycle by dying in battle, a Kandari fallen to the life of a hyena would have to succeed 3 times, once to be reborn as a Niena, second to be reborn as a Kandari, and third to attain a place with Kandarog in the stars. Because of this, all hyena and Niena are treated with some level of respect by their masters. Each represents a soul struggling for Kandarog's eye, just as they are. Whether or not males ascend this ladder seems to be predicated on Kandarog's whim. While they can die in battle as females do, most do not, and thus their advancement is generally seen as being tied to their females. If a female attains escape from the cycle, her males are brought along with her as bounty. The afterlife itself, called the Last Ride by Kandari, consists of raiding the plains of other gods, with Kandarog leading the warband. Since souls are fated as either male or female in all their lives, and there is no need for offspring on the last ride, males are ascended as Niena for their mates to ride in battle. The Sayers. The closest thing to traditional priests or shamans the Kandari boast are the Sayers, elderly or infertile males who commune with Kandarog via the consumption of a potent drug, made from the venom of Kandar's giant scorpions. Afforded more respect than their fellows, Sayers tell fortune, commune with the dead, and advise the Boag of their clan. Their roles, selection, and organization can vary widely from clan to clan. The Boag Bala. Kandarog's children hold that in the years after their creation, Kandarog walked among them. Which year this great leader arose is not known, as the oral histories of Kandar deal only in cycles and orders, and dating is a foreign concept. But she is said to have birthed the mothers of all Kandari clans, unified them under her banner, and conquered what is today Kandar. This first Boag Bala fought several battles with Ichtak I, indicating a rough range of years centered on the beginning of the imperial count. Prior to this period, the Kandari were said to have been consumed by the aimless melancholy that presaged their creation. Afterwards, the lunar way became universal. Boag Bala became a title for any Boag mighty enough to unify Kandar. A series of martial contests called the Echelon, established by the first Boag Bala, decides who claims the title. This contest is called when one clan holds the power and influence to threaten for it, when an outside force threatens the Kandari as a whole, or during any crisis dire enough to force the fractious Boags to come together. In the modern period, where Kandar is a protectorate of Sholosha'idi, the calling of the Kandari to war spurs a challenge to decide who will lead Sholosha'di's allies through the war to come. The settling of Calqua. As time drew on and the years between the first Boag Bala and the present grew longer, the clans of south-central Kandar, who dwelt between the Poco River and the Gulf, grew rich in fish and foreign goods, traded them by sea. They captured slaves to sell abroad from among their kin, and collected much knowledge and weaponry from beyond the lands of Kandar by trade. They began to write to record transactions in clay, and ceased to ride during raiding season, as fish were so plentiful they had no need of plunder. They built houses of wood and stone to withstand the seasons, and ceased to move with the weather and game. They discovered the softest of fine silk, and began to garden the worms and perfect their garb and tapestry for sale in foreign lands. This, they claimed, was a facet of Kandarog's cunning, much as it disgusted their fellows. Liquor came next, imported from Sholosha'idi. Generally banned among all Kandari save Sayers and the dreaded witch-priest outcasts of the clans, it proved highly addictive to a population unaccustomed to its presence. The traders used it as a means of manipulation and control, and whole clans were brought to ruin by its scourge. For this poison, the neighboring clans would pay great wages in tithes, slaves, and livestock. Raids, when these neighbors grew desperate, still posed a dire threat, especially as the settled Kandari grew softer from lack of raiding and privation. Thus they moved into the great red mountains which rose like an island of needles from their stretch of the Poco riverside. Using Sholosha'itian stoneworkers and artisans, hired on from abroad, they had soon erected a formidable fortress city, Calqua. Thus, by around the imperial year 800, all raids on them ceased. As need of war dwindled, and the city-state of Calqua relied more and more upon its walls and trade-driven tributaries to keep it secure, it drifted further and further from the lunar way. Men became craftsmen and traders, and soon rivaled or exceeded the station of females. Tribal clan structures proved inefficient in matters of commerce, and were supplanted by a form of merchant republic. Metal became a currency over meat and skill. Due to the sheer scale of the destruction later brought to Calqua, all we know is told us by the sayers of the nomad clans. Other than surviving art and tablets traded abroad before the fall which have survived the intervening years, Their songs and tales are all we have of Calquaim. But it is said the settled Kandari lost their sayers, and in time ceased to hear the voice of Kandarog at all, doubting she even lived. Even their witch priests ceased to be, or left in disgust. The witch priests. Far darker of reputation than the sayers are the fabled witch priests of the clans. These are crones who live on the outskirts of camps, shunned but not wholly exiled. They practice much more morally ambiguous magics than their male counterparts, usually fueled by sacrifice and pain used in ritual contexts. They are almost constantly drunk or aroused, and believe that by living life in comparative decadence, they can discover yet more avenues of cursecraft and black magic, hidden from their more steadfast kin. The desperate or deranged will often visit their tents under cover of night, seeking ill fortune for enemies or good fortune for themselves. But given the shame associated with this, none dare do so openly, or discuss the dealings afterwards. The annihilation of Calquaim. Over the years since the coming of the first Boag Bala, there had been two others. The first was of Clan Zeema, and led her people in wrath against an invasion of Ida during the 4th century. The second was of the Kawasa clan, and led her people into Sholoshaiti and Gunug in an orgiastic migration of violence. But the clan of the third is far less respected than any of these storied groups. She hailed from the Ka'alam, a clan renowned for its high number of potent witch priests and the remarkable acceptance they hold in the clan. In the imperial year 888, the Ka'alim Boag began to suffer seizures, visions, and vivid dreams. In time, she came to realize Kandarog was speaking to her, urging her to echelon. Within the year, she had done just this. Possessed of a brutal string of preternatural fortune as well as terrible sorceries beyond the most dreaded witch priests of her clan, she summoned all the daughters of the savannah to the shadow of Calquaim. In their camp on the banks of the Poco, she announced that Kandarog had assigned her a task: the punishment of Calquaim, and the desolation of its riches. Calquaim was surrounded by the Boag Bala's host, and placed under blockade by river and land. Sholoshaitian traders and diplomats, by then a common sight upon the stone causeways of the city, were slain or scattered on approach. Priests seeking to convert the residents of Calquaim to the patronage of Harakwe were drowned in the shallows of the Poco to deny them the deaths of warriors, and their corpses were flung against the mountain walls of the city as insult to the defenders. Messengers were dispatched in desperation calling for Sholoshaitian aid to the besieged city, but few survived slipping the encirclement to reach the lands of bloody-handed Harakwe. Those who did would eventually find the young empire embroiled in the war of venom and fang. This existential struggle with the Alospid, Lautani, Ug, and Ida would drag on for decades. Then, in its opening year, the war had already seen the city of Milakatlan near completely annihilated, and the cities of Michinklan and Tlaxcatlan besieged from below. The Shaitians were in no position to dispatch legions to relieve their urban allies in Kandar. Even if this had not been the case, the armies would have been hard-pressed to arrive in time, for the awful fate the Boag Bala and the goddess Kandarog had in store for meek and tame Calquaim was swift and terrible. Only a week into the encirclement, a great conclave of all Kandar's witch priests, who had spent the days of assembly and trances of communion with their harsh maker, offered up sacrifices and prayer beneath the light of a bloody harvest moon. While the fabled Kandari spoken poetry and chanted song used to transmit history from one generation to the next often touches on Calqua and the reasons for its destruction, there are few traces of exactly how this fate was delivered. Even today, these 3,000 and more years later, the wind-blown, scorpion-haunted avenues of Calqua are a source of existential fear to all daughters of Kandarog, occupying a mythic position between horror and sacred reverence. Even mentioning the name of the place outside of performance or necessity is a grave social misstep among them. But an outland traveler in Kandar can find in those ruins the bodies of the ancient residents of the land's sole settled city, not dead, but condemned to a far darker eternity by the goddess whose traditions they abandoned. Their flesh was twisted into the precious metals Sholoshaitan traders had paid them in, gold, silver, and copper, among others. Imprisoned ageless in this metal meat, they shriek their mad agony today just as they did in elder days. This terrible vengeance would consume every man, woman, and child in Calqua. The sole survivors of this divine purge were the diaspora of Kandari craftsmen and newly converted acolytes of Harakwe, who happened to be abroad in Sholoshaiti when their city fell. Many of these Harakwe-worshipping Kandari had settled in Tlaxcatlan, which would soon fall in the War of Venom and Fang, taking many of its Kandari residents with it. In the wake of this great conflict, there were just 400 Calquayam Kandari left in the empire. These folk were granted a quarter in a re-established Tlaxcatlan after the war as payment for Sholoshaiti's failure to answer Calquayam's last, desperate call to arms. From this 400, the Sholoshaitian Empire's Kandari population has swollen to over 3 million, with the hyena folk comprising just over half the population of today's Tlaxcatlan city. Like the Lautani converts of the Southlands, it is often said these forsaken Kandari are more ardent and zealous than any born Sholoshaitian, and they are disproportionately visible in the Empire's cavalry units among both Ektal and army legions. Most not pursuing soldiering careers in the Ektal pursue the stonemasonry or gymcraft for which their forebears in tragic Calquayam were famed.